Hello everyone, welcome back to GGN. This is part 2 of this news bulletin for today, September 13th, 2012. Check out the links in YouTube's video description. I usually put up all the headlines there, so you can basically follow along in the order that they're presented to check them out and go in there and make up your own mind. I'm just giving you my opinion. I'm putting all these articles together, and hopefully kind of tying the puzzle pieces together. So we left off talking about Russia and how Larry King's going to be actually at a Georgia TV station, right? Because they are concerned, right? Talking about the EU, they're very concerned. They're sending observers to Georgia, making sure that that they want a good electoral process. In other words, they want their puppet is what they want. But I've mentioned this before in yesterday's video and last Thursday's video about Egypt basically being this kind of proxy state for Israel and the United States to create this kind of uprising, right? The whole Arab Spring was not grassroots. I've went over this before. And they want to have it so that all of Muslims, see, now this is another thing. This is something that I didn't really I failed to mention in the last video. This is part of the plan, is to all of the Islamic world is rising. Muslims are going to attack Israel and Christians, and this is part of the plan, the Zionist plan. I covered it extensively in last Thursday's video, so go check it out. So this makes perfect sense, and Egypt is going to be there, of course, right there with Muslim Brotherhood, which again is a Western proxy. So to give the illusion that they're all going to go and basically take out Israel. But that's all a show. It's all an illusion. And you have Obama, what? Egypt, not an ally of the United States. I don't think that we would consider them an ally, but we don't consider them an enemy. He said, well, why would you give them a crap load of money? Well, they do. So it's kind of sad, too, because, these people will be willing to, to hang one of their own, including the individual who made that anti-Islamic film. They'll just hang him, just like the ambassador. They'll let him get killed if it furthers their plans. So, moving on, Egyptian-Iranian or Iranian intelligence meeting prompts fears of new Middle East terror access. Let me read this again from the National Terror Alert Response Center. So, they're talking about inducing fear, right? Raising new fears. Egyptian-Iranian intelligence meeting prompts fears of a new Middle East terror access. So this is right after I just covered this article. Egypt's president trying to persuade Iran to drop Assad with promises of easing isolation. I mean, once Assad goes, they're going to be completely isolated, right? Iran. So why would they want to sever those ties with the Syrian government, the current Syrian government? But Egypt is calling on them to drop unquestioned support of Syria's embattled President Assad in order to end the country's bloody civil war in exchange for help in easing Tehran's regional isolation. So, kind of bullshit at the end there, but they're talking about a country's bloody civil war. Well, a lot of it's an invasion by Al-Qaeda, and we know that, right? Al-Qaeda to all Muslims, overthrow Assad. Like, what? Wait a minute, what? So, Zawahiri video says Al-Qaeda should focus on Palestinian plight. So now they care about the Palestinians, Al-Qaeda that is, issuing a commemorating anniversary video of September 11 attacks, which were done by the Zionists, like I said, in which he renews his calls for all Muslims to support the revolution in Syria and accuses the U.S. of propping up Assad's regime. So, wow. So that'll make you scratch your head and wonder what the hell is going on here, right? Quote, supporting jihad in Syria to establish a Muslim state is a basic step towards Jerusalem, and thus America is giving the secular Ba'athist regime one chance after another for fear that a government is established in Syria that would threaten Israel. So this basically plays into exactly what I was saying, because if you can go on YouTube, you can look for a documentary. I'm not recalling it right now offhand. I saw it maybe 6 months ago, a year ago. And it's basically about Al-Qaeda. Is this big illusion? This documentarian tried to locate Al-Qaeda, couldn't actually find them. It's not actually an organization that exists. And more news on Al-Qaeda. We have Al-Qaeda now a U.S. ally in Syria. While we reflect on the 11th anniversary of the Al-Qaeda attacks on American soil, there is a blinding light that may obscure our view. This sworn enemy now fights hand in hand with the U.S. against the Syrian regime. Remember back in, 2001, George Bush's statement, his ultimatum was clear: either you are with us or you are with the terrorists. In Syria, there is mounting evidence that Al-Qaeda and its allies are actively deploying terror tactics and suicide bombers to overthrow the Assad government. Bush referred to Al-Qaeda as the enemies of freedom. The terrorist directive commands them to kill Christians and Jews, but Sheikh Mohammed Zugbi proclaimed that your jihad against the infidel criminal and his people is a religious duty. And of course, this isn't of most moderate Muslims out there. This is a select few, and the government likes to co-opt that too. Alawites are more infidel than Jews and Christians because the new jihad targets Alawites rather than Jews and Christians. Does this render them better bedfellows? So you see the Zionist Anglo alliance is playing this kind of dangerous game, because what they have right now with Syria and Iran is, in Iran, I've covered this before, they have one of the largest Jewish populations in the world. They also have Christians, just like Syria, been living peacefully there for a long time. And what they're doing now is putting in these extremist elements that are a minority of Islam, and that are going to be an actual threat towards Christians and Jews living in those areas. So, and this is being funded by the West. Unfortunately, France to fund arm Al-Qaeda in Syria. Meanwhile, U.S.-backed terror rips across Iraq as Saudi-Qatari coddled Iraq vice president is sentenced to death. I think the last time where they played a real dangerous game like this, where a lot of people died, was probably with the USSR, where they killed, almost 50 million people or something like that, most of them their own. U.S. sends more spies, diplomats to Syrian border. U.S. is increasing its presence at Syria's Turkish border, sending more spies, talking about CIA and diplomats, again CIA, to help advise the rebel forces in their mismatched fight against the better armed Syrian government, and to watch for possible Al-Qaeda infiltration of rebel ranks. Al-Qaeda now a U.S. ally in Syria. France to fund arm Al-Qaeda in Syria. To watch for possible Al-Qaeda infiltration of rebel ranks, or sending the CIA over there. You remember that article, CIA is steering basically RPGs into the hands of the rebels, and incidentally, Al-Qaeda. Then you have this article. Someone mentioned this last Thursday. As I was making my videos, I didn't know this. I didn't see this article, but Eurozone receives key rescue fund from central bank. September 7th, the European Central Bank moved decisively Thursday in announcing that it would buy the bonds of struggling governments without limit, an initiative that could save the Eurozone and blunt one of the main threats menacing the global economy. Well, I'm sure there's many menacing threats to the global economy besides more borrowing and more debt. The move was meant to reassure fearful investors that the Eurozone governments would not default. It says a default by a major economy such as Italy or Spain could trigger a deep recession in Europe and snuff out the U.S. recovery. Hey, the U.S. recovery, right? So anyways, the point of this is what? As they mentioned it, and they worded it as blackmailing these countries. You're going to take this bailout, you're going to take this money, this debt, and you're going to help us out in Syria. So it was funny when I saw this article, Italy ready to intervene militarily in Syria, and this was September 5th. Italy would be ready to send military forces to Syria if Assad is toppled. And then you have QE3. The Federal Reserve fulfilled expectations of more stimulus for the faltering economy, taking aim at driving down mortgage rates. Fed said it will buy $40 billion of mortgages per month in an attempt to foster the recovery in the real estate market. Purchases will be open-ended, meaning they will continue until the Fed is satisfied that economic conditions, primarily in unemployment, improve. Enacting the third leg of quantitative easing will take the Fed's money creation past the $3 trillion level since it began the process in 2008. So they're propping up the markets is what they're doing with this, and they're the QE3 in the United States and in Europe, the Eurozone, they're propping them up, and they're always propping them up. And they can continue to do it forever and ever and ever as long as we believe in this system, right? And support it. So, they go on there and it says, oh, it'll pass a $3 trillion level. Well, $3 trillion, I'm sure it's more than that. So they're talking about expecting another 17 trillion in quantitative easing from April 16th. So they're saying it's actually up to 17 trillion. Then you have 2.6 trillion for 2 million jobs. And it basically says that that the reality is a direct jobs program would be much cheaper and more effective to get the economy moving. Instead, they have 2 million jobs, and it goes on and says that each one cost $1.3 million. In fact, the audit of the Federal Reserve revealed that $16 trillion were done in secret bailouts. So there you go for democracy. You gotta say, right? German High Court approves step towards European dictatorship. Decision on Wednesday by Germany's Federal Constitutional Court clears the way for European Stability Mechanism to extend its power over the national sovereignty of the Eurozone's member states, was celebrated as a victory to save the euro. It was nothing of the sort. It was instead a political victory for dictatorship in the name of the euro. The court said no permanent mechanisms may be created under international treaties which are tantamount to accepting liability for decisions by the will of other states, above all if they entail consequences which are hard to calculate. In other words, it sounded as if the court was protecting Germany from outside decisions, especially if the cost of those decisions would be hard to calculate. The court also gave a hat tip to national sovereignty by noting the relevant factor for adherence to principles of democracy is whether the Bundestag remains the place in which autonomous decisions on revenue and expenditures are made. So this incoherent pronouncement from the 9 red-robed justices was just enough to dampen latent resistance to the ESM by more than 30,000 German citizens who had filed briefs before the court contesting the approval of the ESM while delighting the statists who saw the decision as a green light and another step forward, here we go, to the long dreamed of nationalization of Europe by unelected bureaucrats. So Angela Merkel basically hailed it as yet another strong signal to Europe and beyond that we are an important step closer to the goal of stabilizing the euro. So it's all about saving the euro. Well, no, it's not. It's just that's how they always use everything in the guise of trade or finance is to consolidate power, decision making. EU's Barroso calls for a federation of EU states for September 12th. So this individual, I just noticed a video. There's actually a video where he's actually basically an openly admitted communist or Maoist, including modifying its treaty and highlighting what he said was a need for countries to share sovereignty. And then in Greece, they're ready to sell Greek islands to raise cash. In a desperate bid to raise cash to help keep the sinking economy afloat and convince international lenders to keep rescue loans coming. They say as long as it doesn't pose a national security problem. Well, who's looking to buy them? Israel considering purchasing Greek island for naval training. You have BAE and EADS talks may spur more mergers. They're talking about a big super corporation, Europe's aerospace and defense sector in more than a decade. Britain's BAE Systems and Airbus owner EADS said their advanced talks to create an industry giant that overtake rival Boeing in sales and contend with shrinking defense spending in Europe and the United States. Again, consolidation. GM's Volt, the ugly math of low sales and high costs. So Government Motors is still losing as much as $49,000 on each Volt it builds. So it makes sense that the Pentagon is buying the Chevy Volts to green up the military. From oilprice.com, Afghanistan's natural resources could spark a civil war. The problem is that the experts are worried that the potential wealth to be made from the resources has increased the level of corruption, violence, intrigue in the country. Intrigue. I wonder if that's what the United States is doing. They're intrigued. So it could spark a civil war. Well, controversial plan to split up Afghanistan. A Tory MP proposes dividing the country into zones, some of which could involve the Taliban, which is why they're sitting down to talks, which is why they're rewriting their history, trying to appease the Taliban, who will, of course, be a part of it, and rebuilding their museum. Or what? Rebuilding Afghanistan's air force. In China, Chinese fluoride chemical factory workers attack a German TV crew because they thought that they were spies trying to steal company secrets. So this is the stuff that's sent to America and put in your tap water. Portland, Oregon approves adding fluoride to water. Reasonable people can disagree, but the science is on the side of forced medication. In the UK, tap water is being sold as bottled water. Thank you.